Hey guys, so I'm just going to record a quick video to try and illustrate this particular learning tool and how you can use it to kind of help grasp your understanding of the difference between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And in particular, for those of you who wish to kind of go on and engage in further learning with specific receptor types and things like that, these are the types of resources that are useful. So this is a resource that was introduced to me by one of my own lecturers. So I just thought that, I'd kind of pass on that favor. So as I've kind of been saying in the article, when it comes to you as a personal trainer or a trainee trying to gain sufficient knowledge to understand the role of the nervous system in exercise and things like that, you don't really need to focus too much on receptor subtypes, and specific, whether it's beta 1 or beta 2 or whether it's muscarinic acetylcholine receptor type 1, type 2, type 3, etc. You needn't sweat that stuff too much. It's more so when you're trying to really delve into the details that starts to become important. But overall, I'd like you to grasp the concept. So anyway, here's this tool. This is basically a web page from the University of Texas at Austin. And this is the sympathetic nervous system here. So this is the sympathetic nervous system at each respective organ system. And basically what you do with this tool is you basically click onto the receptor subtypes. So they're the beta 2 receptors. You agonize those. So by clicking them, I'm agonizing them. So a drug that is an agonist is something that, has a positive effect at that receptor. So it leads to the desired receptor conformation change and subsequent function or outcomes, you could say. So basically, when we agonize, when we click on that beta 2 receptor, we see what happens at that respective organ system. So we get an idea that, okay, when we click on the beta 2 receptor and the ciliary muscles, they relax. Okay, boom. So that's in the eye. You look at other organ systems, you see that, okay, beta 2 in the heart leads to vasodilation, beta 1 leads to all these different things that we've kind of discussed. Like, they're the main things that I wanted people to take away in the article, but as it relates to the cardiovascular system. So an increase in conduction velocity, an increase in heart rate, increase in contractility. And the reason, like the heart in particular is one that to be aware of, is that, the sympathetic nervous system is really helping us when we are exercising. So when we are exercising, the sympathetic nervous system is playing a supporting role to allow the heart to provide us with the necessary blood, oxygen, nutrients, etc. that we require to continue exercising. So yeah, as I said, the specific receptor subtypes are not too important. You can use this to kind of figure out what they might be. But what we have, as discussed in the article, in the sympathetic nervous system are the alpha and beta adrenergic receptors, and then you've got their respective subtypes. So for example, you've got alpha 1 here on the fat cells that increases lipolysis, and alpha 2 decreases lipolysis. So you can get an idea of how these different receptors might affect the body if they are agonized or antagonized. And you can also get an idea of just, like, in general, what is the sympathetic nervous system doing? Because it's not necessarily homogeneous in that, agonizing one particular receptor subtype in a certain area might lead to a kind of a different effect somewhere else in the body. So for example, bronchodilation doesn't always equal vasodilation. So you have different effects in the heart and the lungs, and it's all that sort of specific stuff that I don't really think that most of you need to worry too much about. If you want to delve into the details, you can click on the drugs here on the side. So albuterol, see what that's agonizing and see what effects that's going to have. Yohimbine, I'm just picking things here that people might be familiar with. So you can see that the red line crossed this out. So what that means there is that's basically an antagonist. So it's an alpha 2 antagonist, meaning that's going to block the effects that alpha 2 agonism would have, which would be a decrease in lipolysis. And that is one of the reasons that people tend to use supplemental yohimbine during competition prep and stuff like that, because it has the potential to increase lipolysis. So yeah, you can play around with that, do whatever you want to do. But basically the main concept I want you guys to take away from this is, right, when the sympathetic nervous system is acting, what effect is it having on these different organs? So just click around, see what's happening. Okay, so the sympathetic nervous system acts on the lungs. What does that do? Okay, that does bronchodilation. Cool. Why would that happen? Why would your airways want to be open when you're in that sympathetic state? And you think about how that relates to exercise. So if we were exercising, we need to run as fast as possible, and our sympathetic nervous system is helping us out with that. We want our airways to be open so that we can bring in more air and we can allow for better oxygenation of the blood and hence better oxygenation of the tissues that require that during exercise. Similarly, as we already discussed, the cardiovascular system. Okay, why would we want increased conduction velocity? Why would we want an increase in heart rate, an increase in contractility? For the very obvious reason that we need to be able to pump more blood around the body quickly. Okay, we need to get that blood out there fast. Okay, when we look at skeletal muscle, obviously this is something that's of interest to us. Sympathetic nervous system, what's it going to do? Do we think it's likely to decrease our ability to produce force and make us weaker? No, of course not. One would expect that it would allow us to use the fuel in our muscles better, to increase our ability to produce force. And that's exactly what we see when we look at those specific effects. The liver, for example, is another one that might be of interest to people. So when you look at the liver, what you see is that there's an increase in gluconeogenesis and an increase in glycogenolysis. And basically what that means is that the body is trying to mobilize glucose into the blood so that we can use it during that stress response. So again, thinking of that in terms of exercise, why would that be helpful? So when we're exercising and we've got that, the sympathetic nervous system is helping us out, it's beneficial. And that's something I'm kind of trying to reinforce, because people like to think of things in terms of like a real binary manner and thinking that stress response equals bad, and then that's not the case. We want this during exercise. So during exercise, gluconeogenesis is basically the process of creating glucose from non-glucose substrates. So basically, what we're doing there is we're producing more glucose. We're getting more glucose out into the blood. Similarly for glycogenolysis, that's basically just the breakdown of glycogen branches into their free glucose form, again allowing for the body to be fueled so that we can use, our muscles can use that glucose to allow us to keep on working. So obviously you could also see why that might be a problem. So for example, if we're not exercising and we're constantly ramping up the sympathetic nervous system and we're constantly releasing more glucose into the blood all the time at rest, that's probably not the most fantastic thing for health, so that's why you have to think of these things in terms of like a spectrum and in terms of context all the time. We have to ask ourselves, is this effect actually desirable at this point in time? So it is all about context. The gastrointestinal system is another one that's probably of interest to a lot of people, because you do hear about things related to the digestive system as it relates to stress. And I'm sure some of you will have experienced in the past where if you are quite stressed out, it's not really the best time for digestion, and similarly, when you're exercising, you're not going to be very effective at digestion, because again, the sympathetic nervous system is basically taking over in those cases, somewhat antagonizing the effects of the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's basically going to lead to a decrease in our capacity for digestion. So if you look at what happens there, you see that when you click on these beta 2, you get a decrease in gastric motility. That's the personal trainer in me. And again, you can just kind of click around there, see what's happening. Boom, boom, boom. We can see that there's generally effects that are not particularly favorable for digestion. And that again is something that has been reinforced in the article. Again, the kidney, again, is something pretty important. When we get an increase in renin, again, this has been mentioned in the article, that's something that increases our blood pressure, it increases our blood volume. That's beneficial in the short term, so acting to that renin, angiotensin aldosterone system, that's something that's beneficial in the short term when we actually need those effects. However, if you think about what effect that's going to have chronically, again, not something that we really want. So if you're interested in the reproductive system, so for our males out there, and when we're thinking about getting an erection, and then we're thinking about the ejaculation process, it's actually the parasympathetic nervous system that lets you or facilitates the process of you getting hard, getting that ejaculate or getting that erection, and then it's actually the sympathetic nervous system that leads to the ejaculation itself. So the reason that's important is because, or not important but rather an easy way to remember that is point and shoot. Okay, so you point it, that occurs through the parasympathetic nervous system, the PNS, and then the shooting occurs through the SNS, sympathetic nervous system. So that's how we remember it anyway, that's how I remember it, and there you go. Furthermore, the parasympathetic nervous system, you can do the exact same thing here. So again, looking through the effects on different organ systems, you can begin to see what effects the muscarinic acetylcholine receptors are going to have when they are agonized or antagonized. So what you can see here is that the effect that it's going to have on the bronchioles, so within the lungs, is it's going to be a bronchoconstrictive effect. Again, if you think about like why that would be the case, if you're in a more kind of parasympathetic state, you're more relaxed, you're going through your housekeeping functions, you're just chilled out, you don't need to have, your bronchioles dilated or your bronchi dilated. You don't need to have these big wide open airways because you're not trying to bring in quite as much air. You can look at what that does to other systems. So for example, in the gastrointestinal system, you see that you get an increase in motility, an increase in secretions and sphincter relaxation. So that's actually going to be beneficial for the digestive process, as we discussed. It's what allows you to get an erection, as you can see down there. And then in terms of the actual heart itself, it's going to decrease the conduction velocity, decrease the heart rate, and decrease contractility. That's something that's of interest to people because the autonomic nervous system is often discussed in relation to the cardiovascular system. For example, one metric that's often used to try and at least quantify to some degree to estimate the state of the autonomic nervous system is heart rate variability. And heart rate variability, if you have high heart rate variability, that basically means that you've got more parasympathetic input. So well-trained athletes will generally have increased parasympathetic tone in the heart, and basically what that's going to lead to is them having a lower resting heart rate and increased heart rate variability. And there are more adaptations going on there as well, because obviously and decreased heart rate in isolation would not be particularly helpful if you were not actually increasing your stroke volume as well. So if you don't understand that terminology, to be worth going back earlier in this physiology series and reflecting on the cardiovascular system in particular. But basically, if your stroke volume is not increased and your heart rate is decreased, that's going to lead to a decrease in cardiac output. And obviously, we need to be able to maintain our cardiac output. So what you see in athletes is that if they have a decreased heart rate, they've actually got an increased stroke volume because basically the heart is just more effective. So you get a larger amount of blood being pumped out of the ventricle per beat, so per contraction. So that's how, if you ever wondered, how do people get enough blood around their body if their heart rate's so low? Like, if my heart rate's been as low as, the 30s sometimes, especially if I'm in a deficit and I'm well trained at the time and I'm relaxed, how am I maintaining perfusion? How am I getting blood around the body? And that is because the stroke volume is going to be a little bit larger, and that's how you're able to maintain that cardiac output. So yeah, as I said, guys, have a play around with this. I want this to be a kind of an interactive tool that you guys can check out. It's freely accessible. It's not mine by any means, and that's why I just wanted to record a video to show you how you can actually use it, and hopefully you find it helpful. I wanted to kind of use this as an opportunity to elaborate on some of the effects at different organ systems, and hopefully seeing them in front of you, being able to click and unclick and having me add a bit of context, hopefully that aided your learning in some way. So let me know if that was the case, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the article. If you do have any questions about anything in this article, then please feel free to contact us in the Triage Method Community Facebook group, and we would be happy to have more discussion. So enjoy.